Okay, so like picture all the different types of families, just even thinking about your own friends and their families, right? There's so much variety out there. You ever wonder what makes each one work? Like what's going on under the surface?
Yeah, no, for sure. And when you actually start to look into it, it gets really interesting. Family dynamics are so much more than just who's related to whom. You've got all these complex interactions that really end up shaping who we are as people.
And that is exactly what we're diving into today.
Mhm.
We've got this stack of research here. Most of it's from like the world of developmental psychology.
Yeah.
We're going deep into like the inner workings of families and all the different ways adults and kids are living together these days. Our mission, and I think it's a pretty important one, is to give you a better understanding of the forces at play, the things that influence how families function, and then how those dynamics, in turn, play a huge role in each person's development. It's kind of like seeing the currents beneath the surface of, honestly, probably the most important environment we experience.
Yeah, exactly.
So today, we'll be looking at a bunch of things, starting with how parents and kids influence each other. That's called reciprocal socialization, a fancy term, but a really important idea.
Definitely.
We'll also dig into the family as a whole system, with all its moving parts, like all interconnected.
Right.
And of course, we can't ignore the big picture, how stuff happening in society, culture, historical events, all of that impacts families.
Oh, yeah, huge.
Then we'll get into the different paths adults are taking these days, being single, living together, marriage, divorce, remarriage, and same-sex relationships. It's a whole spectrum.
Absolutely.
And naturally, we have to talk about parenting, all the different roles and styles, the challenges that pop up at different ages, and how all of that plays out in different family structures. Finally, we'll wrap things up talking about those other really important family relationships, siblings, grandparents, great-grandparents, and those connections between generations. It's kind of a lot to cover.
It is.
But buckle up. It's going to be good. Okay, so let's unpack all of this, starting with the nitty-gritty of how families actually function day to day. What say you?
So, the first concept, and it's a key one, is reciprocal socialization. It's really easy to just assume that, oh, it's the parents who shape their kids.
Right.
Like they're molding them. But it's way more than that. It's a two-way street. Kids actually have a big impact on their parents, too. It's this constant, give and take, back and forth.
Yeah, and a lot of the research we looked at makes this comparison to a dance. It's like, I take a step, then you take a step, and what I do next really depends on what you just did.
Exactly.
And there's this term for it, synchrony. That's where each person's behavior is kind of contingent on what the other person did just before. And you can see this even with babies. Think about a baby and a parent making eye contact, that back and forth gaze. It's amazing, right? And research has found a connection between this kind of early synchrony and how good a child's social skills are later on. It's like those little moments of connection build something bigger.
Oh.
So the takeaway here isn't just that kids and parents influence each other, because yeah, duh, we kind of know that, but it's more about understanding this dynamic dance and how it plays out so you can be more aware of your own reactions, how you might be shaping and being shaped by the interactions in your family.
And what's fascinating is how these early interactions, they can be so subtle and yet so important. Another great example is this concept of scaffolding. It's about how a parent adjusts how much help they give a child based on what that child can already do. It's about meeting them where they're at. So think back to playing peekaboo when you were tiny. At first, right, the adult's doing all the work covering their face and then boo, but as the baby starts getting it, they start to take turns. The parents essentially building this framework, like a scaffold, for the baby to learn and participate.
Like they're putting up the support beams as the child is building. I love that.
Yeah, it is.
And this isn't just in games. Studies have shown that when adults actively encourage and praise toddlers, those little kids are more likely to be helpful towards others. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
And there was this one study, it was with families facing some pretty tough challenges, and they found that when mothers were taught better scaffolding techniques, like with their babies, those kids actually ended up having stronger thinking skills down the line. So it's like this investment that pays off over time. And building on that, we're seeing more and more research now that's looking at genetic and epigenetic factors in this back and forth between parents and kids. Now, just a quick reminder, epigenetic factors are basically where your environment, your experiences can actually switch certain genes on or off. It's not just about learned behavior. So for example, we often hear about this link between harsh parenting and kids who act out, have behavioral problems. But it might not be so simple. right? It might not be entirely the parents causing it. It could be this mutual influence going on, maybe even some shared genetic predispositions that contribute to both, like a tougher parenting style and the child's behavior. It's this complex interplay of nature and nurture.
It really is.
So we've got this back and forth, a give and take, but let's face it, a family is usually more than just two people, right?
Right.
So that brings us to the idea of the family as a whole system, like a living organism.
Exactly. Instead of looking at your family as just a bunch of individuals living under one roof, think of it more like a constellation of these smaller interconnected groups, or what we call subsystems. These can be based on different things, like generations, parents versus kids, or gender, like brothers and sisters, or even the different roles people play within the family. You've got your one-on-one relationships, like maybe a sibling pair, and then your larger groups, like all the cousins together, or just the immediate nuclear family.
Right. And the crucial point here is that these subsystems, they don't operate in isolation. They're constantly interacting, bouncing off each other, influencing each other, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, like a chain reaction. And our sources actually give this really good example. They talk about how the relationship between the parents, whether they're getting along, fighting, whatever, it can have this significant impact on how they parent their kids.
And it's fascinating how consistent the research is on this. Study after study shows that parents who are happily married, they tend to be more sensitive, more responsive, just warmer and more affectionate towards their kids compared to parents who are, well, not in such a great place. And I mean, it makes sense, right? If the adults are feeling good, it kind of spills over, and they're probably better equipped to be those supportive, nurturing parents.
Yeah, and this isn't about saying that every marriage has to be perfect or anything. Marital happiness is complex. It has its ups and downs, and understanding the different factors at play, like communication, shared meaning, it's all crucial for navigating those long-term relationships. But the point is that a positive vibe between the parents, it can really set the tone for the whole family.
Absolutely. It's kind of like the foundation.
Right. And it goes both ways, doesn't it? If you can make the relationship between the parents stronger, more solid, it can lead to better parenting, which benefits everyone.
Right.
There are even programs out there specifically designed to help couples strengthen their bond. Yeah, and the thinking is that by doing that, by investing in the couple's relationship, it can actually indirectly benefit their kids too. Which kind of raises this interesting question about what actually creates a positive family climate overall. It's not just about having good parenting skills, right? It's also about the quality of the relationship between the parents, whether they're married, divorced, whatever their situation. A positive co-parenting relationship, even after a breakup, that's huge for kids. There was even the study that found that when couples, whether together or not, when they got better at handling those inevitable relationship problems, arguments, disagreements, all that, they actually had fewer co-parenting conflicts. Yeah, and when you zoom out and look at the long term, a positive family atmosphere during the teen years, it's actually been linked to having more positive relationships with your own spouse, like almost 20 years later.
Yeah.
So it's like those early family experiences, they have this ripple effect that can last for generations. It's pretty powerful stuff. So we've talked about what happens inside the family, like the one-on-one interactions, and then the family as this whole system.
Right.
But families, they don't exist in a vacuum, right?
No, not at all.
There's this whole world outside that's influencing things.
Absolutely. How a family develops is super connected to the larger, like, social and historical context. You got to consider the big picture. It's like, think about Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory. You familiar with that?
A little bit, yeah.
So basically, it looks at how, like, the big stuff culture and how things change over time, they actually end up shaping the rules and experiences within families.
The macro stuff.
Exactly. He talked about this thing called the macro system. That's like the overarching culture, the big beliefs and values of the society. And then there's the chrono system, and that's basically about how everything evolves over time. So you get these major historical events like wars, famines, mass immigration. All of those things can have really significant and long-lasting effects on families.
Yeah, and the Great Depression in the U.S. is a perfect example of that. Right?
Yeah.
The economic hardship wasn't just about not having enough money. It actually led to more conflicts between husbands and wives, less consistent ways of raising kids, and even unhealthy coping mechanisms like increased drinking, especially among fathers. It was rough.
It was.
And it really did shape family life for an entire generation. And more recently, you have the huge increase in Latino and Asian immigration to the U.S.,
Yeah.
right? And that's brought a whole different set of challenges for those families. Things like language barriers, being separated from their support systems back in their home countries, trying to hold on to their cultural identity while also adapting to a new culture. And of course, economic changes. There's all these layers of
So it's
complexity,
a lot to navigate.
for sure.
Yeah.
And, it's not just these big dramatic events, right? Even those kind of subtle shifts in society, they can have this ripple effect on families. Things like people living longer, more folks moving from rural areas to cities, the constant presence of media, all of that changes the landscape of what family life looks and feels like.
Totally.
And our sources actually talked about how families tend to move more often now, which can be tough, especially for kids. They're uprooted from their schools, their friends, and they might be losing those close-knit neighborhood and extended family connections that were more common maybe in the past.
Yeah, for sure.
Which brings us to this really interesting point about the impact of technology, right? Especially all the media use, the screen time, it's become such a dominant force in so many families. Kids are often using those devices by themselves, and parents aren't always involved, might not even know what their kids are watching or doing online.
Mm.
And that shift away from more traditional face-to-face interactions, like with friends, and towards more solo screen time, that's a pretty significant change. And the research is starting to give us some insight into what that means. Light use of digital media, it actually seems to be linked to better well-being in teenagers,
Mm-hmm.
but when it gets excessive, like 5 or more hours a day, that's associated with lower grades.
Well,
Yeah, it's a balancing act. And then you've got the rise of online social networking, which on the one hand, it's a way for kids to connect, but it also potentially means less in-person interaction.
Yeah.
And of course, we can't forget about the rise in divorce and remarriage rates, which have led to way more diverse family structures than we maybe saw in the past. It's all part of this constantly evolving social world that's having a real impact on the family unit. So it's pretty clear that what a family looks like and how it operates, it's incredibly dynamic and influenced by so many factors, both inside and outside the home.
yeah, very much so.
So now let's zoom in a little bit and focus on the adults themselves and look at the different ways they're choosing to live their lives. What does adulting look like in the 21st century?
Right. And this is where things get really interesting because, what people consider a normal family has changed so much over the past few decades. There's less of a stigma around, choosing a different path, not feeling like you have to get married and have kids to be successful or happy.
Totally. And take single adults, for example. There are more single adults now than ever before, and that's partly because more people are living together without being married, and partly because folks are waiting longer to tie the knot.
Mm.
But here's a curveball. Our sources actually point out that the U.S. has a lower percentage of single adults compared to some other developed countries.
Really?
Yeah, and the biggest increase in this single adult lifestyle, it's actually happening in developing nations.
Yeah.
So it's not just a Western trend. And it's important to remember that, all those stereotypes you hear about single people, whether it's the always out on a date, having a blast image, or the lonely and miserable one, it doesn't really reflect most people's experience.
Yeah, stereotypes never tell the whole story.
Right. The reality is way more nuanced. And then you've got cohabiting adults, those couples who live together but aren't married. That's becoming increasingly common.
Yeah.
But it's not without its challenges. They don't always have the same legal protections as married couples when it comes to things like property. And they might face disapproval from some family members, especially older generations.
Right.
And the research on those couples who go from just dating to moving in together, it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
It suggests that while they might feel more committed in some ways, their overall satisfaction with the relationship can actually go down. And there might be more negative communication, more conflict, compared to couples who are just dating. Yeah, and there's even research linking cohabitation to a higher risk of violence between partners, which was a really serious concern. However, it's not all doom and gloom. The chances of a marriage ending in divorce actually seem to be lower for couples who live together later in life, in their mid-20s or older, especially if they were already in love and didn't have kids from previous relationships. It's like they had a better sense of who they were and what they wanted. And we're seeing a growing trend of older adults, folks over 50, choosing to live together. Often it's more about companionship or financial reasons like protecting their assets. And what's interesting is that research indicates that these older couples who are cohabiting, they might actually have more stable relationships compared to younger couples who are living together, but they're less likely to have plans to get married or to provide care for their partner if one of them gets sick.
Wow. All of that's super interesting.
Yeah, it really highlights how, like, the context, the age, the reasons behind cohabitation, they can really impact the experience. So then there's marriage, right? Like the big M. But even marriage has undergone some pretty major shifts. Marriage rates in the U.S. have been declining since the 1960s, and the average age for people getting married for the first time just keeps climbing. It's almost 30 for men and close to 28 for women now. And we're seeing a larger percentage of adults choosing to never get married at all.
Yeah.
But even with all of that, the U.S. is still very much a marrying society.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, though, because even though fewer people are getting married, a lot of young adults still see marriage as a really important goal in their lives. Some research even suggests that they might be delaying marriage on purpose to focus on their education and careers first. It's like they're trying to build a stronger foundation, hoping to set themselves up for a successful marriage down the line. So it's not necessarily that they don't want to get married, but they might be approaching it in a different way, more strategically.
Hmm.
And when you look at, like, how happy people are in their marriages, well, that's changed over time, too. It went down from the 70s to the early 90s, then it went up a bit around the year 2000, but it seems to be trending downwards again. And one thing that's been pretty consistent is that married men tend to report being happier in their marriages compared to married women.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and we could definitely do a whole deep dive just on that. But even with all the ups and downs, being in a good marriage still has some pretty significant perks. People in happy marriages, they tend to live longer, healthier lives compared to folks who are divorced or unhappy in their marriages. They even have lower death rates and healthier hearts. It's pretty wild.
It is.
And, connecting this back to the bigger picture, the social environment a couple lives in, that really influences how their marriage unfolds. What might be seen as a huge problem in one social group or culture, it might not be a big deal in another. For instance, one study in the U.S. found that poor communication was a bigger issue for couples with higher incomes, while things like drug use or infidelity were seen as more serious problems for lower-income couples. And when you look at different cultures around the world, things get even more diverse. Like in China, there's a legal minimum age for marriage. And in India, arranged marriages are still quite common. And even the qualities people look for in a partner, whether it's virginity or being good at keeping a house clean, those can vary a lot from one culture to another. And of course, religion plays a big role in shaping people's marital preferences in many parts of the world. It's a reminder that marriage isn't this one-size-fits-all thing. It's shaped by cultural norms, beliefs, and even economic factors.
It makes sense.
So our sources also delve into what actually makes a marriage work. Like, what are the ingredients for success? And there's this psychologist, John Gottman, who's done a ton of research on this. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Oh, yeah, I have.
So Gottman, he's identified these key things that predict whether a marriage will thrive or not. And they include things like really knowing each other well. Like he talks about having detailed love maps of your partner's life, their feelings, their experience.
Love maps. That's a cool way to put it.
Right. And it's about showing fondness and admiration for each other, turning towards each other for support instead of like ignoring each other when things get tough, being willing to let your partner influence you, consider their opinions, learning to manage those inevitable disagreements through talking it out rather than trying to solve everything immediately, and then creating shared goals and a sense of meaning in your life together. It's like building this deep friendship, a sense of teamwork, a shared purpose.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And what's really interesting is that, like, premarital education, those programs that couples can go through before they get married,
Right.
those actually seem to have a positive impact on all of this. Couples who go through those programs, they report higher satisfaction, more commitment, less conflict, and they even have a lower chance of getting divorced.
Wow, so those programs actually work.
It seems like they do. But our sources did point out that couples with lower incomes, who statistically might be at higher risk for marital problems, they're actually less likely to participate in those kinds of programs. So there's this accessibility issue there. And what's fascinating is that even the relationship skills you build in your early 20s, those first serious relationships, that seems to have this long-term impact on how well you'll adjust to marriage later on in life. It's like setting the stage for future relationships. And then when you look at marriage in later life, the rates are higher for men than women, which, part of that's because women tend to live longer and so they're more likely to be widowed. But overall, older adults who are married or in committed relationships, they tend to be happier, less stressed, and they live longer.
Yeah, there seems to be this real protective effect of having a partner.
Yeah, and they often report being more satisfied with their marriages later in life, which can help them stay happy even as they face health challenges or other difficulties. And get this, having a supportive spouse is even linked to the length of your telomeres. Those are those protective caps at the end of your chromosomes that are like a marker of how quickly your cells are aging. It's wild. And on the flip side, having a poor relationship quality can actually negatively affect blood pressure in older couples.
Yeah.
So there's this really strong connection between our relationships and our physical health, especially as we age. But of course, taking care of a partner who's sick, especially later in life, that could bring a whole other set of challenges.
Yeah.
So marriage, it's this incredibly complex, constantly evolving thing with so many different factors influencing it. But what happens when those relationships end? It's a reality for a lot of people.
Yeah, it is.
So let's talk about divorced adults. What does the research say?
So divorce rates in the U.S., they've actually gone down since their peak in the mid-20th century. But here's the thing. The U.S. still has one of the highest divorce rates in the world. It's pretty crazy. Almost half of first marriages in the U.S. will end within 20 years. And there's research that's linked certain personality traits to a higher risk of divorce, like people who are low in agreeableness and conscientiousness and high in neuroticism and openness to experience. And if a divorce is going to happen, it usually occurs fairly early on in the marriage, typically between the 5th and 10th year.
It's such a major life change, even for the person who initiates the divorce. There's often loneliness, diminished self-esteem, anxiety about the future, and just finding it hard to create new relationships. It can be really tough.
I bet.
And the research we looked at, it actually highlights how divorced individuals face a greater risk for all sorts of mental and physical health problems compared to married folks. Things like depression, alcoholism, even a higher risk of suicide. And they're more prone to heart attacks, especially women. There's some pretty distinct gender differences in how the whole divorce process unfolds, too.
Oh, yeah.
Women are more likely to be the ones who sense problems in the marriage and actually initiate the divorce. They also tend to adjust emotionally better afterwards and might see it more as a chance for a new beginning, but they often face more negative financial consequences compared to men. So there's this trade-off. And, coping with divorce, it's a process. And it involves things like focusing on personal growth, making thoughtful decisions about your future, utilizing your strengths and your support system, accepting that there will be setbacks, and understanding that positive change takes time and effort. It's not something that happens overnight. And then there's this trend that's emerged called gray divorce, which is basically an increase in divorces among middle-aged and older adults.
Like over 50.
Yeah, and it's been happening more and more since the 1990s. And there are a few potential explanations for this. One is that views on women have shifted, there's less stigma around divorce, and women are more financially independent these days. And another factor is that second marriages, which are more common among older adults, they tend to have higher divorce rates in general. And this one survey by AARP, it found that a lot of people in this age group said they actually stayed married for their kids' sake. And even though it was difficult, most of them felt they made the right call by divorcing, and were actually pretty optimistic about the future. It's like they'd reached a point where they knew they deserved more.
Yeah, I get that.
The main reasons they cited for divorcing later in life were things like growing apart, communication breakdowns, abuse, infidelity, and just feeling incompatible. But divorce later in life, it can have some pretty serious consequences: social, financial, and even physical. Things like weakened family connections, financial insecurity, especially for women, more health problems, even higher mortality rates, and lower life satisfaction. So it's not a decision to be taken lightly.
Yeah, for sure.
And here's something that's interesting. The same factors that are linked to divorce in younger couples, they apply to older adults too. And those marriages that have lasted longer, they tend to be better quality, there's more home ownership, more wealth, and a lower likelihood of divorce. And being partnered later in life, it also means you're more likely to get better Social Security benefits and avoid poverty. So there's a financial aspect to consider as well. So divorce, it's a complex issue with a lot of layers, and it impacts people in different ways at different stages of life. Now, after divorce, a lot of adults do decide to remarry, but the remarriage rate in the U.S., that's been going down too, probably because more people are opting for cohabitation instead of jumping back into marriage. And men are more likely to remarry than women, which kind of aligns with some of those trends we talked about earlier.
Makes sense.
But here's the catch. People who do remarry, they often find it tough to stay remarried, and the divorce rates are actually higher in second marriages compared to first marriages.
Really? Why is that?
Well, there are a few possible explanations. Sometimes people remarry for reasons other than love, like financial security, help with raising kids, or just because they're lonely. And they might bring baggage, negative patterns from their first marriage into the new one.
Oh, yeah, I could see that.
And then there's the added stress of blending families, raising kids in stepfamilies. And believe it or not, even less frequent sex has been cited as a factor.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, it's complicated. But making those stepfamilies work, it often involves setting realistic expectations, developing those new positive relationships with stepchildren and the new partner's family, creating new traditions together, and making sure that everyone gets some time and space to themselves. It's about finding that balance.
Right.
And finally, we need to talk about gay and lesbian adults. The legalization of same-sex marriage in 2015, it extended all those legal frameworks around ending relationships to same-sex couples as well. But beyond the legal stuff, research has consistently shown that same-sex relationships are actually very similar to heterosexual ones in terms of the satisfactions people experience, the love, the joy, and even the conflicts. Like every couple needs to find that balance regardless of their sexual orientation.
Makes sense.
And many gay and lesbian couples are choosing to start families and raise children.
Of course.
And research has found that lesbian couples, they often prioritized equality in their relationships. And some studies have even found that over time, gay and lesbian couples who are living together tend to have higher quality relationships compared to straight couples. And there's a more equal sharing of household chores and childcare responsibilities when both partners are working.
Interesting.
It's important to address some of those common misconceptions out there, too, like the idea that traditional masculine and feminine roles are the norm in same-sex relationships. That's not really true.
Okay.
And the misconception that people in same-sex relationships have a lot of sexual partners, that's also not accurate, especially for lesbians. And generally speaking, most folks in same-sex relationships, they're looking for long-term commitment. Now, some gay couples might have those open relationships where they have sex with other people, but not romantic involvement, but that's less common for lesbian couples. And a unique challenge that many gay and lesbian individuals face is, of course, dealing with all the stigma, prejudice, and discrimination that exists.
Yeah, for sure.
But some couples, they actually say that facing that negativity together can make their bond stronger. So there's resilience there.
Definitely.
So it's pretty clear from all of this that there's no one right way to be an adult, and people are choosing all sorts of different paths, each with its own unique joys and challenges.
Now let's shift gears and talk about parenting, which is, a whole other adventure.
It is, and there's so much diversity in how people approach parenting, all the different styles and philosophies, and a parent's role, it changes and evolves as their kids grow.
It's a constant learning curve.
It is, and despite what you might see in the media sometimes, the research actually suggests that parents are generally more satisfied with their lives compared to people who don't have kids. And they tend to experience more positive emotions from taking care of their children than from other everyday activities.
Wow, that's nice.
Yeah, it is. But of course, being a parent also comes with its challenges, right? There's the stress, financial strain, sleep deprivation, and sometimes conflict with your partner. All of that can impact how happy you feel.
It's a balancing act.
It is, and we're also seeing a trend towards couples having fewer kids and starting families later in life.
Right.
And there are potential pros and cons to both, right? Having kids younger, you might have more energy.
Yeah, but less money maybe.
Yeah, exactly. But having kids when you're older, you might have more life experience and more financial stability.
Right. It's a trade-off.
It is. And that transition to becoming a parent, it's a huge adjustment for most people. Our sources actually talk about this workshop called Bringing Baby Home that's designed to help new parents strengthen their relationship, understand their baby better, resolve conflicts, and develop those parenting skills. And it seems to be pretty effective. The parents who go through it, they tend to be better at co-parenting. Fathers are more involved. Mothers experience less postpartum depression. And even the babies show better development. So it's like this early intervention that can have these ripple effects.
That's really cool. And an important role for parents, no matter what age their kids are, is being a manager of their kids' lives.
Yeah. This includes everything from like providing opportunities, keeping an eye on their activities, to helping them connect with others, guiding their choices. And as kids get older, this role kind of shifts toward helping them learn to make their own decisions. So it's a gradual process of letting go.
Yeah, finding that balance.
Exactly. And for babies, managing their behavior might mean making sure their environment is safe, gently stopping them from putting something dangerous in their mouths, things like that.
Yeah.
As kids grow, it's more about managing their schedules, making decisions about things like school, extracurricular activities, homework, screen time, all that good stuff. And research shows that how well parents manage those aspects of family life, it's linked to things like their kids' grades and how responsible they become. So it's not just about being strict or lenient. It's about creating that structure and support.
Yeah, creating that framework.
Exactly. And here's a little twist. As teenagers start wanting more independence, they also start to manage what they tell their parents, choosing what to share and what to keep private.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And when parents have that positive parenting style that involves trust and acceptance, teenagers are more likely to open up and share. So it's all about building that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, when it comes to parenting styles, there are a few main ones that we often hear about. Our sources outline 4 of them: authoritarian, authoritative, neglectful, and indulgent.
Hmm.
So authoritarian parents, they're the strict ones. They demand obedience without really explaining why. There's not much room for discussion.
Right.
And this style, it's often linked to kids who are unhappy, fearful, and not so great at communicating. So not ideal.
No.
Now, authoritative parenting, that's seen as more balanced and is often considered the most effective style.
Hmm.
These parents,